And now Mr. Moghal, the winner of this year's GRIPS SDGs Award, will speak about his award-winning project. Mr. Mohammad Sajjad Moghal graduated from GRIPS's Public Policy Program in 2005. Since then, he has built a career as a government officer, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and a business strategist. For some years, Mr. Moghal worked in the Policy and Planning Division of the Pakistan government's Small and Medium Enterprise Development Authority. Then, as an expert in private sector development and public-private partnerships, he became senior advisor at USAID and took the lead in the Dairy Project, a $27 million public-private partnership that supports 50,000 poor farmers and rural youth. The project is a joint effort of USAID and the Dairy and Rural Development Foundation, and it is for this accomplishment in this project that he has been designated for this year's award. The title of Mr. Moghal's speech is Innovative Approaches in Public-Private Partnerships for Meeting the SDGs. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Moghal. Mr. Moghal, please.
Thank you so much. Let me start by saying that how honored I am to be given this forum and presenting today my project. I'm extremely thankful to the entire faculty at GRIPS. In fact, it was their contribution that I was able to do and contribute something towards SDGs. President Tanaka, GRIPS staff, fellow students, and alumni at GRIPS. Let me tell you, I always used to say when I was in Japan that Japan is a very, very unique place. It profoundly changes you, but the change is so subtle that you don't realize. And that transformation, in fact, helped me to conceive and do something for the poor. And ultimately today, enabling me to be in front of you presenting this project. Let me start by sharing the presentation. In 2011 was a very difficult year for Pakistan because we were already going through a war on terror. Afghanistan was neighboring country, and we were all struggling here in Pakistan as well to deal with the extremism tendencies, and it was getting a little violent. So the first thing was that we did a complete mapping of the society where the vulnerabilities of the poor are and what are the demographics of those that in fact make them vulnerable. And among them was access to the livelihood resources, which makes it very difficult for people to live on their normal life as we are all familiar with. So I was asked in 2011 to design a project which basically targets vulnerable youth, especially creates some sort of a livelihood opportunities where they see a career, and in fact counter the appeal to the extremism and the violent terrorism, and in fact integrate them to a normal society. So we started looking at some of the options, and dairy came up. And I'm trying to change the slide, in fact. Just give me a second. can I ask if you can start sharing slide from your side? Somehow I have lost control in changing these slides. Okay. So here is basically the primary socio-economic indicators that tells us that how it was at that time when I was asked to design the project. There was a huge, large endowment in terms of animals available which can produce milk, and milk being the basic dietary also support for the most, most of the families, as you can see, that there are about 5.4 million or so families which are dependent on the milk as the only source of nutrition. But the problem with the whole chain was that this was way too expensive to produce it. It was 30% more higher. And there was also a shortage of supply in the market, something around 8 billion liters. So dry milk was imported and mixed with water. And our productivity was 100% less than India and 200% less than Mexico and 500% less than the USA. So we were thinking that we can really do, but it was a huge, next slide. So, but the whole sector, if you look at it, so it just shows you that how difficult it was. I will not go through all of them because you can always read it at your leisure. But there was an issue of the skills development. There was issue around the health and nutrition improvements. There were issue about the basic infrastructures at the farms. Genetic improvements was required. There was a no stable, reliable supply chain for the inputs that they needed. Public policy was not really favorable. And there was no connectivity among the value chain players that how the value is exchanged throughout the chain and how you can add more value to it. So primary considerations as I was designing this project was that I need to have a scalable and a flexible model which primarily latches on the local resources and local partners. We cannot have, one of the speakers rightly mentioned that think globally and act locally. And that was in fact the essence of this project. So we were trying to integrate small dairy holders into the value chain, which was a high value chain. It becomes a part of the processing milk value chain so that they can have an additional income. We ought to have extension services for breeding, for feed and fodder, and health management of the animals. The whole regulatory regime was quite anti-private sector. There was a milk pricing control, which was controlling it and not allowing it for the private sectors to invest, because when you cannot raise your prices and you are not paid for your cost, then you are really not interested as an investor to come out and do it. And another interesting feature was it was the women and children we wanted to integrate, because small farmers was primarily managed by women, and the children were their unpaid domestic help. And above all, that was the only way to reach out to the most vulnerable under the countering violent extremism approach that we had. So while we were designing, we tried to, razor sharp the focus. So what we were seeing that there is a 40 million workforce associated with this sector. There are 9 million households associated. And something like 4.5 million out of these 9 million households are very, very poor. So we need to create a low-cost farm upgradation so that they can improve their milk yield. There is some saving coming out of that. We wanted to integrate all those 15 million women who were basically responsible for feeding their child and sending them to school. But as you know, the Pakistani society is very patriarchal, and the men are controlling all the major economic and the social decision, including restrictions on the mobility of a woman. And from a value chain perspective, the production was 30% less productive the whole chain is, and the costs are high. And we needed some private sector partner which can come up with the resource and the knowledge as well. So we chose Nestle, as it is shown in the middle of the screen, because I think whatever we are doing, we needed a value chain partner who knew the market inside out, so that that knowledge can be integrated into the project and the management capacity, so that we can have a head start. And roughly around 9 million farms needed assistance, and we wanted a sustainable model which goes beyond the life of the project as well. So we needed an organization, an institutional platform which takes on that responsibility going forward after the life of the project. So this is my favorite quote. You never change a thing by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model and make the existing model obsolete. This is what, in fact, I would say the stars were aligned and I was able to pull it through. Otherwise, if you think it more methodically, it was really, really difficult at that time. So when we were selecting some of the local partners, our primary thinking was, who is the strong partner which has a management capability, outreach, and is able to share resources? Because the only way to know if whatever they are saying has some value is if they put their money on it, if they start betting on that. Otherwise, we can all have a discussion and the thoughts and different kind of ideas, but does these ideas work or not? The proof of the pudding is by having a money on this. And secondly, we also needed a separate implementing partner, because there was Nestle being a very, very large organization, being the largest dairy processor in the world. They also had some political issues and the public outreach and the public branding issues, that they wanted to remain at arm's distance from USAID, especially in Pakistan, because of it's America, it's American strategic interest, there was a war and all that stuff. So it was a very complex interplay of different factors. But Nestle, while they wanted to work with us, they still wanted to be, at arm's length from us. We really have to structure something which, in fact, can help them. That's why we look for an implementing partner which was separate from a resource partner, which was Nestle. So the third logo that you see on the right top is the Dairy and Rural Development Foundation, that forced us to look for a local organization which can help in the implementation. We also needed to create a basic capacity, which included infrastructure and the human skills. We needed advisory group, because I may know a lot, but I know I don't know everything, especially when it is scattered over a large geographic landscape. Then it is extremely important that there are right partners who are really there. We had from a get-go a very, very strong M&E function, and we had at least 3 different partners, including we requested USAID Office of Inspector General to look into that. We also used to conduct even data quality audits, that the data that is coming is of that quality that can be presented and can be relied upon. So we defined the objectives. As you can see, it has been very nicely summarized by the 2 speakers. It was about employment, it was about opportunities to the youth, it was about poor, integrating them into a value chain, which in fact also transfers some value in terms of an income back to them. So I will not go one by one into these, but we started with skills. we translated those skills into income generation activities. We measured that. We continued to improvise and improve it as we moved forward. I will explain to you that there were two basic phases of this project, but keeping these objectives in mind, we were in fact continuously evolving. While we were evolving, we were also setting up a stage for a Dairy and Rural Development Foundation to become a sustainable, self-help, not-for-profit organization, which continues to support poor farmers as as the project resources fades away or cease to exist. So Nestle, as I mentioned, that they were here since their mid-80s. They had long enough history of working with farmers across Pakistan. At the time when I engaged with them, they were already connected to roughly around 350,000 farmers from where they were doing their milk collection at their milk hubs. And they were struggling with their own cost, value chain cost, and they were scaling it back. Their first year target in 2011 was to scaling it down, the milk collection from 350,000 farmers down to something like 70,000 farmers. This was not a good news, so we chipped in, we said that we can help you. Why don't you expand your processing facility? We work on the supply chain side so that your supply side is more efficient, more cost effective, and still farmers gains. So they agreed. And as their commitment, we also got a commitment of 5.1 million US dollars money that they will get. And that also had a management capacity, which I in fact borrowed from them. I asked them to second the key staff as the project manager because I needed a team which can help me to do things that I wanted to do. We needed to have in the value chain the commercial acumen, which can do the economics that as the value or the product passes from one stage of a value chain to the other, somebody can do the math, and that math is workable and commercially viable. And then there was an added issue that when USAID in fact supplies, gives you money, there is a whole issue of procuring medicines and nitrogen gas, which was essential for artificial insemination technician kids. So USAID said that it requires something like 1 to 2 years to get all the necessary approvals in place before we can even procure a single medicine or a single pill. And we didn't have time. So we asked Nestle, they said that we can do it from our procurement system and then we can supply it in kind to the project so that the activities are not affected. And then we also convinced them wherever we do some improvements, then Nestle will come in. And on a weekly basis, long-term agreements, procurement agreements were done on the competitive bidding basis. Interesting thing was in competitive bidding basis, Nestle ended up paying 9 rupees, which is something around 9 yen per liter extra to those farmers who were able to target to meet certain standards of quality and quantity. So Dairy and Rural Development Foundation was our natural choice because we wanted a local partner, as I said. It was a not-for-profit. It was not a government entity. And it was in operation since 1996. And that was the most credible platform, which was in fact recognized by all breeders, farmers, and the processors as well. They were primarily at that time was focusing on the high yielding breeds, crossbreeding, artificial insemination. They were doing some small scale trainings as well, but their operation was very limited in terms of their outreach. So as we were evolving the organic relationship that developed, so all these three organizations which are connected through red lines as a triangle was the resource partners. USAID was chipping in money, something around $21 million. Nestle was another roughly around $6 million. Dairy and Rural Development Foundation as an outfit with their people and everything. And we also needed some credible partners who can help us with the technology, with the skills, and also verifying it for the government institution. But at the heart of it was the government itself. We wanted the government of Punjab and the government of Pakistan to be aware of what we are doing, so that we wanted to influence their development funding, which is anyway public sector funding is the largest form of doing any development work in any country. So there was a bigger buy out there. We had University of Veterinary Animal Sciences, the maroon burgundy logo that you see on the right side in the middle. It is the most premium institution in Pakistan of veterinary sciences. So all our trained staff was in fact assessed, tested, and then certified by the University of Veterinary Animal Sciences. We kept it independent because we never wanted that there is no inherent conflict of interest. If a Dairy and Rural Development Foundation is preparing the skill sets and also training them, should not be the testing and the certifying body. It should be a separate entity, which turned out to be very successful. We had another ComSat, which is a regional university funded by OIC's, Organization of Islamic Countries. It has a major campus in south of Punjab, which is central Pakistan, a little south. They had a very robust faculty, so we also integrated them. And then we had Punjab Vocational and Training Council, which was our primary outfit, where we started training thousands and thousands of farmers and the women and the boys so that they can get skills. This is the value chain that we were looking at and the approach that we in fact used. If you look at that, it is very systematically sees that where the value is transferred and how it is being exchanged within the value chain, and as the product moves, how the money moves. So looking at the skill set is basically translating into the production itself. The production results in basically the farms, and the farms moves towards basically a processors, which in exchange returns money back to the whole value chain. So if there is an additional milk available, that means there is an additional money available in the value chain. If cost is cut, that means there is a more income available. Now people have a capacity to incur some cost either on farming practices or improving the feed and fodder practices, or go for from a curative health services, move towards the preventive healthcare system, where they can not allow their animals to become sick and then they cure them, rather they prevent them from falling sick. We came up with very, very interesting kind of jingles. It was songs 317, and that meant that an animal should be for 300 days, 3 stands for 300 days in lactation, and 1 heifer or calf should be born to every female, so that there is additional kick to the productivity, and also an animal is a kind of an additional income if they won't even sell it in the market. And then 7 is the 70% of the herd should be in lactation at any given point of time, given that there will be some heifers and calves which will be in fact rearing in the herd. So we came up with the first thing, the skills development, as I showed you in my previous slide. So our first 2 years were focused on, along the value chain, you should have extension services available across the value chain. There must be someone who can tell them how to improve your farm. There must be someone who tells them that what sort of a feeding practices that you require. There must be someone who can supply you all these nutrition and the feed resources when you want to do that. So if you look at that picture that I'm showing on the right, it has a Vanda written on it in the local language, which means animal feed. This was locally, in fact, produced in the in the local communities. So there is no much of a transportation cost involved. These are bulky items. We in fact lashed on the one of the United Nations project by F, World Food Organization, FAO, and we created about 12 recipes. They were using it, and we trained farmers on that so that these feed resources can be. Then we started training them on the silage making, which we'll come to that later. But the first 2 years was skills development along the value chain, and wherever skills are developed, we started integrating them into the value chain so that people start buying those services. So here you see that we at the end reached out to roughly around 50,000 farmers and 70% increase in their milk yield by using our local resources and their skill sets that we gave to them. The silage making is primary source of feed. When there is no fresh fodder available, then this can replace it, and it is highly nutrient. There was 1,000 silage bunkers already available in the project sites when we left. There was 151 farmers, in fact, adopted those practices by looking at what we have done there. And in fact, 48,000 farmers started paying for those extension services, which we created through the skills development. So then came this breed, because the largest, in fact, bang for the buck was where the animals start producing more. That cannot happen unless we, distance ourselves a little away from whatever was happening by the natural breeding, but artificial insemination. And then in artificial insemination, we crossbred those animals, and within the second lactation, when they start producing milk, because it was 2011 to 2016, so there was a new herd which has come down. People can see, touch those animals, which were a result of artificial insemination and crossbreeding, and they were in fact high-yielding milking animals. So it was easy for them. So we wanted to create a whole supply chain for the artificial insemination. Interestingly enough, it became so popular that our trained AIs became so sought after that they on average started earning $80 per month. They were previously, remember, they were previously all young, unemployed men or boys with no prior employment or a formal employment or livelihood access. We also, in fact, provided them with the AI kits, and we also had a performance-based criteria, those AIs whose insemination or conception rate exceeds 60% and stays there for 3 to 6 months, then they will be given a motorcycle as a gift, initially free, and in last 3 years of the project on a 50% cost share basis, because sustainability was a primary motive. Then we came to, as I told you at the very beginning, that women were in fact at the center of the entire value chain, be it rearing animals, being it milking, collection, and selling, or even providing health services or extension services. So they were very much focus of this whole thing at the very beginning of it. And they were also primary health care service providers to our value chain as we are moving along. People were not in the habit of paying them because they were always taken as free domestic help. There was a huge cultural change that we had to bring in. We always gave them a startup kit for starting their business after the training and after the certification. But in 6 years of operations, after that, these women were on average were able to earn $17 per month, which anyway is above the poverty line. So I think there is a lot that can be done, but we needed a persistent force behind it moving forward to make that cultural change to come by. 6 years are not enough. So typically this shows that how we were doing on how we were doing all along this women, how we were integrating them. This is one of the typical classrooms, as you can see, in the local communities. And this is the best picture, and I love it because this woman was finally able to send their kids to school when she had a savings available through the services that she was providing. And it was amazingly interesting to learn by supporting them that 80% of all their incomes goes to, healthcare of their kids or the family members or educating their kids. I would say this was the best ever use of additional income one can think of from a social development perspective and the socio-economic development perspective. We also now started that people realize that this is helping, but we needed to in fact create a demonstration effect that how farm itself should have been structured, organized, or managed so that we can really see a meaningful change. So we were using previously the training farms at Nestle's, but they were remotely, there were only 2 farms and we have to transport all the farmers to them. And then there was a varying degree of a difference in the infrastructure available in the local communities and the infrastructure that they saw at those training farms. So sometimes people were not really encouraged because the gap was so big that they could not really think of bridging that gap because they did not have enough capital to improve their farms to that level. So we started looking for services and supplies hub within the communities. We initially selected 50 sites. On cost share basis, we started upgrading them, which was primarily upgrading their herd, upgrading and replacing some of the animals, creating a feed and fodder pit in there so that they can have a stable supply of feed and fodder for their animals, moving them from a curative health services towards preventive regime, helping them to connect with AI services and extension services from the project trained women livestock extension workers, and basically orienting them into a thinking that you should start paying these women as they are providing you all these services. And at the very beginning, I said that there was a jingle 317. That became our lens to see through the performance of the farm. So there were small little, whiteboards hung on the walls of every farm where they have to comply with the 317. Any animal which is not in lactation and remains in lactation for 300 days, then that is an issue. He should look into that. Why that animal was not able to give milk for 300 days. Reason, it could be health issue, it could be the breed issue, it could be anything. And then it goes like this. Why a female did not give a heifer or a calf? And it could be a health issue or the feed and a nutritional issue. And this is how we resolved. When they started realizing that, and we also created those video resources that they can go back again and again using their mobile phone, we realized that the Pakistan is fairly a very well covered mobile phone nation, because there was something around over 100 million mobile connections and people are using it. So these videos really help using a social media to reach out to that and learn and keep learning. If they miss something, they can go back, watch it. And exactly this happened by having those upgraded farms, that if any other farmer who want to upgrade their farms and doesn't know or cannot figure out how to do it, they can go back to these farms and have a look at that. We had an access agreement with all these farms for because of our contribution for their upgradation, that they will allow the local communities to come and train and see everything for at least 3 years in lieu of our contribution in their upgradation. So at the end, we were able to mobilize another $1 million from the local investment. There were more than 40,000 additional sessions, which we never in fact visualized were conducted at those farms, and they become the supply and services hub. Community mobilization. We broke many myths. First, there was no culture of having discussion. You can see in the bottom left picture, I am sitting just behind the woman and talking to the entire village about these dairy developments. I'm in Chalwar Kameez and behind this woman. That woman and men were making decisions. They didn't know what are the issues with the women, why herd is not producing enough, why there is not commercial surplus available from even a household farms, and why it is not transforming into the economic well-being of the family. So this all needed to be addressed. This all needed to be addressed collectively as a community. So the mobilization was one of the key or the pivotal activity in this whole thing. We in fact engaged female veterinary doctors to in fact ask women to come, and then we allow men to come and see how we are doing and what we are doing. We even allowed men to see that when we are training women, they can sit outside the classroom and see that their women are basically productively engaged and positively engaged to dispel their any issues. And then we in fact brought these street theaters. If you look at, this is a very busy picture. In fact, I want to talk more about that, but given that you can also Google it on a YouTube, that these street theaters is in fact a scripted way of telling people what the dairy is about. And we conducted about 600 to 700 such street theaters during the life of the project. And the entire village, including kids, women, men, used to come out and participate in that. This 1 hour kind of an entertaining way of communicating with them was an enormous success, because I saw kids singing those jingles, and they were primarily how to manage your cows, how to manage your farm, how to take care of your finances and all that stuff. When it became so popular, then I realized that now basically it is gonna trigger the change. We augmented it with all these resources by uploading it on the different social platforms, YouTube videos, modules. We also used to use electronic and the print media during those days in a very systematic fashion, that what is happening, how it is happening, and communicating it. Reason being, we realize that we can only reach out to 50,000 farmers physically, but there are about, in the beginning I shared with you, there are about 5.4 million families which need our help. Who will reach out to them? These campaigns, in fact, reached out to them. We also used to have a very regular radio shows where we used to take live calls of the farmers during that. Very busy days in those days. So, as I mentioned initially, that strategic management is not possible without proper M&E. So we used to have a steering committee. This steering committee met about 35 times in 6 years, periodically, to look into the issues. And that was all staffed with the commercial players of the dairy sector, the development players of the dairy sector, and the public policy experts as well, and the academia. I, in fact, gave the chair of the steering committee to the private sector actor to give them an ownership, to move it the way they want to move it. Though the money was in my hand and it was moving with my signatures across the project. And we very diligently and very and after consensus, developed their operational plan, and the steering committee was in fact helping us. So basically what we had at our disposal by having these steering committees, they could peep into the project activities, they could see the results, they can give us a guidance, and we in return can leverage their social contacts, their contacts with the private sector and the public policy experts, and also the public sector, the government itself, to have some changes. As a result of that, two provinces, Government of Punjab and Government of Sindh, in fact adopted 100% adopted our model for their public sector funding. All the results that I have written here are attributed to the project, but if you count on them, the results that was produced by the public sector spending money, you can easily multiplying them by 10x. So institutional capacity, I mentioned to you that DRDF. DRDF now has a cross-subsidizing model. They have the largest breeding facilities or breeding services activities funding mechanism, and through that they are basically subsidizing their development activities across, and they are still functional. They have the largest breeding services and supplies network available to them, and that money is utilized to that, even to help farmers. I'm sitting on their board now as an honorary member and looking at their activities. We still have a commitment from the Nestle Pakistan, which contributes roughly around 2 million rupees, which is something around $200,000 every year to the resources. Here is the outreach. By having these circles as small white dots, you can see where we were able to operate. We used to traverse something around 2 million kilometers every year for 6 years to reaching out to those communities. We used to transport women to the training facilities and train them and then send them back. And so is the case with artificial inseminations. And this is how you can see the density of the density of animals in different areas, geographical areas of Punjab, but we were present almost everywhere where it mattered. Here are basically the summary of achievements, which was clearly summarized very well. We directly reached out to 50,000 farmers. Our last estimation is that we were able to influence another 2 million through our outreach and marketing campaigns. We were able to employ directly through our support 2,489 unemployed youth, 6,000 and more women who are providing extension services. We also have large farms and training of farm managers. 311 of them, in fact, were promoted and now managing a large commercial farms of more than 2,000 animals per farm. We created roughly around 9,000 new or 8,500 new extension services jobs, which were not there prior to our intervention. They are serving more than 50,000 villages across Pakistan. It is all sustainable supply chain by DRDF. DRDF is now a profitable entity, financially sustainable entity, and they are still continuing with the activities of the dairy project and using that cross subsidy model. And there are about 50,000 rural households which really benefited from our intervention. I will stop here with the basics. I will encourage anyone who want to ask any question to come back to me. But before doing that, I will request to play Reaping a New Dividend. There is a partisan challenge is a video, which in fact captures within 6 months what we did with women. It is a one element. I'll request them to play that video for the audience so that they can see that how we really meaningfully change the lives of these women. And then I'll be open for all the questions. Karen-san?
Women play a pivotal role in managing livestock in rural Pakistan, carrying out most of the activities related to livestock feeding, cleaning and health. In recognition of this fact, the USAID DRDF Dairy Project, launched in July 2011, included a specific component in its design to improve the performance of rural women in this sector. The Women Livestock Extension Workers Training Component, or the WLEW program, aims to develop a pool of locally trained, readily accessible livestock extension workers to provide support services to rural dairy farmers. The Dairy Project, through these focused interventions, is playing a catalytic role in creating new employment opportunities and increasing incomes in rural Pakistan. The WLEW training program selects underprivileged women with a high school matriculation and trains them in basic animal health management techniques and entrepreneurship. These trained women are then supported by the Dairy Project to establish them as animal healthcare extension workers or as dairy input suppliers. Asma represents one such woman living in Toba Tek Singh in the province of Punjab.
मेरा नाम आसमा है, मेरे दो बच्चे हैं, मेरे मियाँ जो है वो एक प्राइवेट स्कूल में जॉब करते हैं, बीमारी की वजह तो करके उन्होंने स्कूल की जॉब छोड़नी पई, इस वजह तो आज बेरोजगार हैं। मेरी तालीम FAI मैं घर च फारिग हूँ, अपने मियाँ की बीमारी वास्ते परेशान हूँ, तालीम होने के बावजूद कि अपने बच्चों की मुस्तकबिल वास्ते कुछ भी नहीं कर सकती।
However, where there is a will, there is always a way. And the way was shown to Asma by the social mobilization team of the Dairy Project.
साडे गांव में एक USAID Dairy Project की टीम आई, जिन्हें सानू WLEW की ट्रेनिंग के बारे दस्या। मैं गांव वाले दे मुख्तलिफ गल्लां दे बावजूद मैं इस टीम में अपना नाम लिखवाया। इस एक महीने की ट्रेनिंग में साडी मास्टर ट्रेनर ने सानू जानवरां दे बेहतर निगहदाश्त, उन्हां दी मुतअद्दी बीमारियां तो उन्होंने बुनियादी मसाइल के बारे सानू अमली तौर पर सिखाया। इस जहाज में ट्रांसपोर्ट ना होने के बराबर आई, मगर USAID डेयरी प्रोजेक्ट ने सन पिक एंड ड्रॉप की सहूलत दे के इस मसले को आसान कर दिता।
Asma successfully completed the WLEW training course and was awarded a certificate by the University of Veterinary and Animal Sciences. To establish her as a qualified extension service provider for local dairy farmers, the Dairy Project supported her with a basic animal healthcare kit and a mobile phone.
आज मैं लाइव स्टॉक एक्सटेंशन वर्कर के तौर पे अपने गांव में काम कर रही हूँ। मैं इस काबिल हो गई हूँ कि मैं ना सिर्फ अपने गांव के लोगों को इब्तदाई तिब्बी इमदाद फराहम करें, बल्कि इस दे नाल जानवरों को बेहतर पैदावार हासिल करने के मशवरे भी दे रही हूँ। डेयरी प्रोजेक्ट ने लाइव स्टॉक के माहिरीन ते दवाइयां दी कंपनियों नाल राबता भी करवा दिता है।
Asma, now a trained WLEW, is not only supporting her family, but is also serving her community by fulfilling the unmet need of dairy animal health services.
मैं तकरीबन 600 जानवरों का चेकअप कर चुकी हूँ, जिस तो मैं 46,000 कमा लिया है। मेरे घर का चूल्हा जलना शुरू हो गया। मैं अपने हस्बैंड का इलाज भी करवा रही हूँ ते मज़ीद अपने कारोबार को बढ़ाने वास्ते पैसा भी खर्च कर रही हूँ।
Along with the animal healthcare extension workers, the other category of WLEWs caters to the farmer's need for quality dairy inputs. The Dairy Project also provides support for establishing these WLEWs as input suppliers in their villages. Nazra is a resident of Chichawadni who received training as a WLEW and is now successfully running her small business of supplying concentrated feed to local dairy farmers.
USAID Dairy Project ਦੇ ਤਰਫੋਂ ਟ੍ਰੇਨਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਮੀਟਿੰਗ ਹੋਈ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਤਾ ਚੱਲਿਆ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਮਹੀਨੇ ਦਾ ਟ੍ਰੇਨਿੰਗ ਕੋਰਸ ਮੇਰੇ ਗਾਉਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਮੇਰੇ ਤਲੀਮ ਮੈਟ੍ਰਿਕ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਇਸ ਮਿਆਰ ਦੇ ਮੁਤਾਬਿਕ ਮੇਰਾ ਇੰਤਖਾਬ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਟ੍ਰੇਨਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਜਾਨਵਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਬਿਮਾਰੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਜਾਨਵਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਬਿਹਤਰ ਨੌਸ਼ਨਮਾ ਔਰ ਸਿਹਤਮੰਦ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਮਤਵਾਜ਼ਨ ਖੁਰਾਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਇਆ ਵੀ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਅਮਲੀ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਿਖਾਇਆ ਵੀ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਅੱਲਾ ਦੇ ਫਜ਼ਲ ਕਰਮ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਗਾਉਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੰਡੇ ਦਾ ਕਾਰੋਬਾਰ ਕਰ ਰਹੀ ਹਾਂ ਇਬਤਦਾਈ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਡੇਅਰੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ USAID ਦੇ ਤਰਫੋਂ ਚੰਦ ਬੋਰੀਆਂ फ्री मंडे दियां मिलियां और इस डेयरी प्रोजेक्ट की टीम मेरा राबता एक मिहारी मंडे बनाने वाली कंपनी नाल करवाया मैं मंडे के कारोबार दे विच 3 महीनों दे विच 30,000 रुपया कमा चुकी हाँ जिहदे विच कारोबार वधावन दे नाल मेनू घर दीयां बुनियादी जरूरतां भी पूरीआं होईयां मेरियां और मैं इस गर्मियां दे विच एक फ्रिज खरीदिया जिहदे विच मेनू बहुत सारा फायदा होया।
These women represent a symbol of change, a testimony to the fact that interventions triggered by community needs, if implemented with a passion and a clear focus, are always successful in achieving the set objectives. Pakistan's rural dairy sector needs more enterprising women like Asma and Nazra, who are willing to be part of the desired paradigm shift to modernize the country's dairy sector in line with international practices.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moghal, for this very inspiring talk.